Glad to know you're still with us. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPCL, recently released its 2023 audited financial statement, showcasing a significant profit increase and highlighting key financial developments. However, despite Nigeria's 37 billion barrels of proven crude oil reserves, representing 3% of OPEC's total, NNPCL's performance falls short when compared to other national oil companies, NOCs. For context, while Russia's Gazprom, Malaysia's Petronas and Brazil's Petrobras reported profits of $14 billion, $19 billion, and $25 billion respectively, NNPCL's profit, when converted at the current exchange rate of 1,600 naira per dollar, stands at a modest $2 billion. Interesting, you would say. Well, for more on this, I am joined by Temitope Kolade, Senior Manager, Oil and Gas, Power, Andersen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Right. Well, I believe you've seen NNPCL's audited 2023 financial result. What do you make of it?
Well, it's a good step, I would say, in the right direction, that we are getting some sort of transparency continually from the current management of the NNPCL in making efforts to ensure that we begin to have the financial status, the position, as well as the performance of the company. And so we can begin to review and analyze and see whether the company can do better from a financial standpoint. But I think it's a good step that we are getting that document in the public domain in the first place.
Interesting. So let's come to the 3.3 trillion naira profit, which is an increase of 749 billion naira from the previous year's profit of 2.54 trillion naira. How significant is that? And how much of that increase can we actually attribute to, naira devaluation?
All right, so thank you. It looks like you've answered the question already.
Well, I said how much of that, so you can help us fix that number.
Yes, indeed. If you think about Naira devaluation in the last 1 year, it's been more than 200%. So we would think that if you think about it properly, if you dimension it properly, it means that we shouldn't rejoice so much about it. And again, given your introductory statement as well, when we then begin to do the comparison or the benchmark with other comparable, I would say, oil companies across the world, you would see that there is still a very large room for improvement for the NNPCL.
Well, talking about that room for improvement, I would like you, to speak more to it, especially in comparison with what we are saying. I mean, doesn't the NNPC have the capacity to actually do much more than it is doing? 23 trillion naira revenue. I mean, do you think that is even good enough?
Well, let's say we are starting from a place. When you look very critically at the documents, the financial statements of the NNPCL, what it basically says is that the company was registered in the year 2021, and that's a fall off from the Petroleum Industry Act that was enacted in that year. So it's like we're having a new start with the NNPCL. So if you think about it from that point of view, it would appear that it's a growing company. But if you think about it from the point of how long Nigeria has been into oil production, and back to 1971, when we had the Nigerian National Oil Corporation in itself, would say it's even older than Malaysia's Petronas, which is declaring about $18 billion compared to the 2.2 thereabout billion dollars that NNPC is declaring. So again, it's a case of where do we really stand? But if we were to dimension it objectively, we'll think that given that we even have more potential in terms of the reserves in Nigeria, if you think about the oil production from Malaysia, for instance, it's just about 500 to 600,000 barrels per day compared to the 1.2 to 1.3 million and thereabout that the NNPC has been struggling with in the last couple of months, right? So again, we would say yes, indeed. When we then go back to Petrobras in Brazil, it's even a far cry altogether, because that's about $35 billion in profit, and it's only about 20 years older because it's about 70 years compared to the 50 plus years of the NNPCL, if you go back to when NNOC was in place in Nigeria. So indeed, when you look at even available information, it will tell you that the vandalism, the oil theft, and the several insecurity issues that we've had in Nigeria and we've contended with in Nigeria has basically stalled the sort of growth that we would really desire from the sort of financial health that the NNPCL should be posting in real terms.
Well, we'll come to that, but then the devil they say is actually in the detail. Looking at the revenue for the period under review, is there really anything to be excited about? I mean, how slim or robust is the bottom line from 24 trillion naira revenue to 3 trillion naira profit? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, in terms of the revenue to the profits, there is nothing much to contend with in that sense, because again, like you said, the devil is in the details. When we begin to dimension the details in there, you will see what makes the cost of sales, what makes up the administrative costs, and maybe the financing cost as well. So it gives us what the bottom line should really be. Again, I don't think in the first place that the revenue is what it should be. Don't forget that the revenue comes from a place of exploration production, right? Brazil, for instance, does about 2 million to 3 million barrels per day, and Nigeria, as we said, has been struggling with much less than that. Again, insecurity means that a lot of cost has to go into fighting insecurity in Nigeria. The cost of doing business in Nigeria is a lot. So when we look at it from that perspective, it may be justifiable that, oh, you'll find a reasonable profit from the sort of revenue that you have. But again, let's even go to the top line in the first place and say, do we have enough revenue as we should have it? And of course, again, we might have to go in through the cost of sales and begin to say, really, should we have expended this much cost to produce this much in the real sense of it? Aside from the security issues that we keep dealing with, some of the costs that we should maybe put into some other things. How do we ensure that we deal with things around expending so much into the refineries that have not worked in the last couple of years, and we continue to have that cost year on year? So those issues are really there, yes.
Well, talking about those issues, I mean, we have some that I can just sort of share now. I mean, there are those reports of donations skyrocketing by 3,515% in 2023, from 314 million naira in 2022 to 11.35 billion naira in 2023. And I also have the amount spent on the top 10 management officials of the NNPCL, that also increased by 100% from, 1.3 billion naira in 2022 to 3 billion naira in 2023. I mean, those should sort of give us an inkling of how this money is being spent or managed.
Yes, indeed. When you think about it from the point of the donations to the NNPC Foundation, it's a more recent establishment in itself. And year on year, if you look at the comparison, basically that wasn't there in the previous year. So it must have included things around the cost for setting up the NNPC Foundation itself. And I guess what the public will be concerned about is to say, what exactly is the NNPCL Foundation doing? I understand that it's been involved in training youth corps members. It's been involved in trying to get people to make some business pitch and provide some financial literacy to people. But again, it will be good if you get someone from the NNPCL to speak to how much has been done to incur as much as over 10 billion, which is really like more of the reason for that jump that we see in the cost for donations. And I mean, other things that we also need to look at, like you said, the top management staff. You would agree with me that in most corporates across the world, you would always see that the top guys get a lot of the chunk because they do a lot of the work. We can't downplay the efforts they put into that. But again, as a company that is registered for the profit of, I mean, the whole of Nigerians will be interested in how much these guys do to earn as much as we see them earn.
Right now, for a long time, we do not have clarity about NNPC's crude-backed debts. I mean, this may or not even be all the clarity we need, but let's work with it irrespective. We have something to work with. And then part of the presentation made by NNPCL showed that it pledged a total of 67,000 barrels per day for its $1 billion debt on the rehabilitation. Oh my gosh, on the rehabilitation of the Port Harcourt refinery under Project Yield. And there is also the 21,000 barrels per day pledge on an NEPL loan of $950 million under Eagle 2 project. And that's, of course, for general corporate purpose. And we also have the Project Gazelle, which a lot of us are aware of, which, of course, has to do with 90,000 barrels per day for $3.3 billion from Afrexim Bank. I mean, you can also add to that the 4 forward sale agreements and $989 million cash commitment. I mean, is this even healthy? Do you think NNPCL, as it stands with all of this, can fulfill its obligations to local refineries at this rate?
Well, it's a tough one for the NNPCL to be able to fulfill its obligations to local refineries from the point of where we are generally in the industry today. The production level is at the, I mean, it's not at its best, right, to say the least. Right. So if you think about it from that point and all of these forward sales that have been done, this pledges to ensure that there is a debt to secure the future or the present of the company, as it were. It's a tough one to be able to meet the requirements from the local refineries. So that's a clear one. But I don't think it's just the issue of the NNPCL. I think the federal government in itself needs to step in and to say, how do we ensure we deal with it? Again, if you look at the corporate governance of the NNPCL today, it's not at its best. There are plans to begin to have things around the initial public offers, but is it even ready for that? Are the people ready to even put their monies into that entity as it were today? Does it have the right structure to take external funding in the sense that it should take it? So a lot has to happen in terms of setting up the right corporate governance to give the comfort to the public that indeed we are ready for this, and it's then something that can then help to restructure the debts. I agree with you that we are not at the best place where we have not even earned revenue and we've already taken the money and expended it. That's not a good place to be as a company, even though debt is typically not the rights. It's not a bad thing for any organization, so to speak, an entity. It's basically about what you want to take that debt to do, whether you want to really expand and deal with the issues to ensure that we begin to have the sort of results that we want as a country from the nation's oil company.
I like what you said about, the plan to come to the market. And of course, you've talked about investor confidence, and you also talked about the valuation it could achieve in the market. You've answered that question. But let me put this to you now. For a company that plans to list on the exchange, what does, a profit margin at 14%, that's according to the 2023 report, profit margin at 14%, earnings per share at 16.49 kobo, and 80% dividend payout. And we also have the return on equity at 12%. We have debt to assets ratio of 1.8%. What does this imply for an investor? I mean, looking at that particular breakdown, because for shareholders, for investors who want to take up shares, these are the things they want to look at, PE ratio and all of those. What do you think from this?
Well, I would think that to start with, what investors will be most concerned about will be about the potential of the company, and to say the least, the NNPCL has great potentials, right? In terms of what can it do. The share price could be as low as ₦1 per share today. It wouldn't really matter if we are sure that there is a strategic focus and objective to get the company to be as profitable as it could be. And again, it ties back to how much of corporate governance do we have? How do we appoint who is the MD or the GCEO? Who takes the decision? How do the board of directors come together to take decisions, right? Those are the things I would personally be concerned about as an investor, much more than what the ratios are today. The ratio could be bad, right? What you want to also think about is what's the debt ratio today, for the most part, to say, oh, how do we continue to ensure that this company is sustainable in itself? How do we ensure that this company is able to stand by itself and run its operation freely and fairly and without interference with government? Because that's really what you want to do when you're going out there to say everybody in the public should come and put in money. You don't want someone to also be the major stakeholder and could decide the fortunes of that company tomorrow and everything is down for the share price that you bought. So I think those are more important to me as an investor, in terms of setting up the right processes to ensure that the decisions are being taken to the best interest of the investors and not necessarily based on the decision or the thinking of those who are appointed by government to run the affairs of the company.
Temitope Kolade, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts on the show today.
Thanks for having me.